My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a part 1 of 2 video interview with Lenora Jelinek Watson, a lifelong Cedar Rapidian with a rich Czech heritage. Lenora, tell us when and where you were born.
I was born in Cedar Rapids, February 17th, 1922, and I was born in an immigrant house on the street by St. Wenceslaus Church. It was the first house right by Benish's drugstore on the corner.
Mm-hmm. Is that back in the days when they would hire or have a lady come in to assist in the childbirth?
Yes. I was brought to earth by a midwife.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you remember her name?
No, I don't.
That's okay.
No, she was a big fat lady, I know that.
What was your parents' names?
My parents' name, my mother was Catherine Lipshansky Jelinek. She married Frank Jelinek, and that was my dad, Frank Jelinek.
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I had a sister named Rose.
Mm-hmm. What nationality was your mother?
A Czech.
She was also Czech?
Czech.
Mm-hmm. What year did your dad come to America?
1911.
Could you tell us that story?
Yes, he was 14, and when they became 15, they had to go and serve their country, regardless who they were or what part they came from. And so he had an older brother that was taken because he was older, and he was taken, and he was in this war only 2 months, and he was killed. So his father said that he wasn't going to give up a second son, and so he contacted the underground agency. There was an underground agency that you had to pay them so much, and they saw to it that they got your son out of the country and to United States. And so he was given a map, and that's what all he was followed, and then his father did the paying.
Did your dad have a trade over there?
Yes, everyone when they went to school, they had to learn a trade, and so my dad had chosen to be a cooper, which is, of course, making barrels. Mm-hmm. And he went to school for 2 years along with school. Mm-hmm. And, of course, in school you had to keep passing every grade or you didn't go to school anymore. And he passed all his grades with flying colors, and he was very good in math. And so he became this cooper, and I got the certificates for it, and to prove his internship.
Mm-hmm. That is your dad on the left end of the picture with his hands on the barrel rim?
Yes, yes, and that's in Europe. That's at the shop.
In order to make these barrels, different size barrels, different volumes of barrels, and to figure out how they would be cut and formed, must have been quite mathematically involved.
It didn't seem to be difficult with him, and they had special tools. I still have his tools from Europe that he brought over here to make the barrels, and I had his mathematic book, and I gave it to my daughter that is a math teacher now.
That map in the center of the picture, is this something he used to find his way?
On his way all through Czechoslovakia, up through Germany, and down on the coast there where he caught the ship to come to the United States, which was the Bremen, the ship Bremen.
The map is so delicate we don't want to unfold it. Okay. So, when he got to, what terminal did he come into?
He came into Baltimore. They brought him into Baltimore. I don't know why. They didn't. That was the place he came into, and that's where he was given a name tag, and he was put on a train, and he was supposed to come to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, because there was a friend in the village where my dad came from, which was Holinsko, Czechoslovakia, and there was a friend there that had a son here. And this son, he was supposed to look up the son that was supposed to be in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And instead, the train conductor misread his name tag and sent him to Northwood, Iowa, and that's where he stayed. He stayed for the whole summer. What happened is when he got off the station at Northwood, there was a farmer there and said, "Oh, "Oh, you're the young man I'm looking for," and he just hired him and took him on the farm, and he had a job.
I imagine there was a lot of immigrants coming into the country at
Yes.
the time, and
Yes, and there were people at the stations waiting for him just to hire him to do something, or take him home with him. You know.
so once he got to Northwood, he probably didn't have any money.
No, he didn't have any money, so he had to work for the farmer, whether he wanted to or not. And then he saved enough money, and then the farmer was nice enough to put him on the train and send him to Cedar Rapids.
You had mentioned in the pre-interview that the farmer had quite a few daughters, and
Yes,
he
he
kind of
had
hoped.
7 daughters, and he had hopes that someday that during that time he was there, that maybe he could make some kind of a match, but it didn't work.
So when he finally did get back to Cedar Rapids, how old would he have been? 15, 16?
Oh, well, no, he'd still been 14,
14?
because his birthday was in May 30th.
Where would a young person like that, not being able to talk Czech, that young, find housing in Cedar Rapids?
Well, when he got to Cedar Rapids, when the conductor, any of the immigrants, when they came on the train, as soon as they start coming towards Cedar Rapids, he'd start yelling in Czech and Russian and German. He'd say, "Now you be sure and get off at this little station here on 12th Avenue. Don't you go into Cedar Rapids or you'll get lost." And so Dad thought, okay, he'll get off on 12th Avenue. So he did. And there was this son, evidently his father had notified him, and his name was Pekash, but he went by the name of Baker, and he met him. And he says, "I can't let you live with me because I don't have room, but I'll take you to where all the immigrants are taken, and you can stay there, and then I'll keep in touch with you." And so he took him to a little Quonset. There was a big, long Quonset building behind Secra's Bakery on 16th Avenue. And all the men could stay there free. They just slipped on their clothes and slept in their clothes. There was an outside toilet, an outside pump where they could shave and clean up. And they could stay there until they got a job or got a place to live. And so he didn't know just what was going to happen, so he stayed there and that evening, and in the morning about 5, 6 o'clock, here comes a man yelling at the top of his voice, "You better get up if you want a job. If you want a job with me and want to make some money, you better get up and come with me." He said it in Czech, and then he said it also in English, and he also said it in another language, and that was a Mr. Stodela. His name was Mr. Stodela, and he was head of the construction for the City Fathers in Cedar Rapids, and he was trying to build a wall around the island where the courthouse and the memorial building is, and that's what his job was. But it was all done by hand. They had shovels, and they had to dig down the bank and smooth it off, and then they had to mix the cement in wheelbarrows and pour it over the side, and they had to do all that stuff by hand. So it took from early May until way late in the fall to get it all done. So he was very proud that they built that whole wall around the island and saved it.
Did he mention what he possibly got for pay?
No, but his first paycheck he bought himself a hat.
And then a couple years later, did he get caught up in World War I?
Well, in 1919, that was after he was married, they were trying to draft people in World War I, and so he decided he'd go down and see if they'd take him. He was learning his English. He wasn't very good, but he was learning it, and he was studying for his citizenship papers, and he had gotten his citizenship papers, and he got his card that he applied at the draft board to go into the service, and they told him, "When you can read and write English, we'll take you, but we can't take you now. So you go back and work the best you can." And so he never did learn to read and write very well.
And tell us about the story about your mother immigrating to America. Then, why did she decide, or her folks decide, for her to come to America?
Well, there was a man going through the countryside, and he would stop at all the villages, all the little villages and all the farmsteads, and and he said, if you have any girls between the ages of 12 and 18 that aren't attached or aren't married or engaged or anything and are free, we would like to have them come to America, because there were a lot of men over there that didn't have wives, and they needed wives. And my mother was from a large family of 13, and so her mother said, oh, you're going to go. You're just in the prime of life, you're going to go. And so she was just 12, and so she went and sold a cow. And when she sold the cow, she gave the money to the man. That was to pay for my mother's voyage. And so the man said, okay, you, in the spring, you come down to the Mediterranean Sea, down to the harbor down there, and we'll pick you up by boat and take you over to England, and there you'll catch the big boat and go to the United States. And so she was all excited about it, and so, but she had to walk that whole distance, which was 2 days and 2 nights. And she took along dried bread and dried meat to live on. And that was her food. And she walked down there. Well, all these girls from all over Europe were coming down there, all walking down there. And she'd meet several of them coming down the road, and got acquainted with quite a few of them. Well, when they got down there too late, because the man says, I've already got my quota, I can't take any more of you girls. And of course, all those girls were paid. They had paid him, see, I mean, the parents had paid him. And so he said, you'll just have to wait and go in the fall, because we're going to take these girls, and then we'll take you all in the fall. So you be sure October the 12th you'll be down here, and we'll get you on the ship to go to United States. So she had all summer to be at home, and so in the fall she finally went down there. Well, in the meantime, she hadn't heard about the Titanic, and that first group of girls went down with the Titanic. And of course, they never heard from them or heard anything, but they knew that all that first group went down with the Titanic. But she didn't know about that till she got into the United States. News didn't go around the country that fast. And so, anyway, in the fall, she got on the ship, and she went to England, and there she caught the big ship to go over to the United States. And they put her down in a hole way down in the bottom of the ship, and they banged down the big old iron gates, and they told her that she was supposed to find a spot and stay there and don't move or you'll lose your spot. And the place was just full of people, adults, families, everybody, and some of them even died there, and all they had for water was a dripping out of a faucet. Well, she couldn't get to the faucet. If she went to the faucet to get any water, she would lose her spot. So she just stayed there, and you had to hang on to whatever food you had, because they were stealing from one another. And so they were down in that stench and that smell. And
did they have any toilet facilities?
No, they had no toilet facilities. They did everything right there on the deck. Everything was done right there on the floor. And then you sat in it or laid in it, I guess. And she was so disgusted because, it was just so smelly and so bad. Well, when they got closer to the United States, they let them come up to see the Statue of Liberty. And when they came up, half of them couldn't even see because it'd been dark down there. And when they came up, they all got on their knees and they prayed to God and thanked God that they made it safe. And my mother said she thought that the Statue of Liberty was the most beautiful thing she ever saw in her life. She just couldn't get her eyes off of it. They all felt it was like a god or something. And so then they took them into Staten Island, and when they took them into Staten Island, as they took them off the ship, they turned these great big fire hoses on them and squirted them down and just saturated them with water. And she had long hair way down to her hips, and they had scissors there that, as the ladies that had long hair, they just cut it right up to their scalp, their hair off, because it was so full of lice and so filthy dirty. And then they would just wash them off with these hoses, and they just stayed in their same clothes till they dried. and they were put in, like she said, they were put like cattle in stanchions. And they were in these stanchions, and that's where they were examined by doctors and to see if they were okay so they could stay in the United States. If they had any kind of disease or any illness or the doctor found something wrong with them, they'd send them right back to their own country. But if they were okay, they could go on. So then, yes.
Was there anybody there to meet her?
No.
What part of the United States was she headed towards?
She was heading towards Cedar Rapids, but she didn't... No one was to meet her. So they made her a great big piece of paper on her shoulder to her name and where she was going and where she was from. And she couldn't speak a word of English. And so they put her on this train, and she got on the train and she got into Chicago. Do I tell the story in Chicago?
Yes, please.
Well, she got into Chicago, and they told her she had to get off this train and she had to go across the ways to go to another train to get to Cedar Rapids. Well, when she got off the train, the conductor was standing right there as they were getting off the train, and she saw this black person, and she started screaming and yelling, and she grabbed the conductor and she wouldn't let go of him because she thought it was the devil, because she was taught in Czech that if she had anything to do with the man, the devil would get her. And she thought the devil was after her, and all she could yell is that she hadn't been anywhere and she hadn't done anything wrong, and she didn't know what the devil was doing there getting after her. And the conductor tried to console her, and she was crying and carrying on, and these two young teenagers came up. They were real young boys, came up, and they knew Polish, so they came up to her and they kept telling her, lady, calm down, lady, calm down. There's a lot of those black people around here, and they're all black. They're just like you and me, but they're black. And trying to explain to her, and they kind of settled her down. And so then they asked her if she's hungry, and she said, yeah, she was hungry. So they took her to this little cafe and got her a bowl of soup, and kind of calmed her down. Well, then when she got calmed down, then she went back to the train there, and they said, well, that she'd go over there to get her train to Chicago, to Cedar Rapids, but instead of going to Cedar Rapids, it was going to, I can't even think of the town. It was going somewhere else. It was going to Wisconsin. And so when she got to Wisconsin, they realized that they read the paper wrong, and so then they had to tell her to catch the next train and go back to Chicago, go transfer and go back to Cedar Rapids. And of course, it was a real confusing mess. And these young men decided to go with her, and so to help her. And they were just real young guys, and she didn't know who they were, but they could communicate. And so they stuck with her, and so she got on the train to Cedar Rapids. Well, she always felt bad because she didn't take their names or find out more about the boys or something, because they were so helpful for her. And, after years and years and years, they were already in their 80s when one of the men came to Cedar Rapids. He'd been trying to locate her. And he had married, and his wife died, and he was living with his mother. And he decided that he was going to look up that Katarzyna Lipshansky. And by golly, he found her. And so he stayed with my folks for a while, and then he went back to Chicago. And so they were corresponding for quite a while. But I don't know. I don't think he's living anymore.
Would she have come into Union Station, or?
No, she came they yelled and had her get off at that little station down there.
This little station you're talking about?
The same station down there on 12th Avenue that
right next to the railroad tracks.
It was a little shack, and it had a potbelly stove in it, and it was just a small little thing. And I can't seem to find any pictures of it or anything. I've looked for years for pictures of it. And they wrecked it, they destroyed it. But anyway, she was supposed to get off there if she wanted. Don't go into Cedar Rapids or you'll get lost, And so she got off there, and when she got off there was a lawyer a young lawyer there that Leschinger lawyer, and Mr. Leschinger, and he had a family of 4 children, and he came up to her and he asked her if she was looking for a job, and she didn't know really, he spoke Czech, and she didn't really know what, and he said, well, I'll give you room and board, and you help my wife take care of 4 kids and do the washing and help with the cooking and everything, and I'll give you room and board, and I'll take good care of you, and I'll pay you 25 cents a week. And of course my mother thought 25 cents a week, she'd be a millionaire. So she just grabbed that right away and went home with him, and she stayed with him a year.
This picture, Lenora, is your dad's folks?
Yes, that's
Would that have
my
been
dad's mother and dad.
over in the old country?
Over in the old country. Yeah.
What was his occupation? Did your dad ever say what his dad did?
He was partially a cooper, and then he was also a farmer.
And then
And my great grandfather was he made cloth. He had a big loom and made cloth.
And the elderly lady over here on the right-hand side, you said that was your aunt?
This lady here, that's my mother's mother that came over here. She came over here then.
Okay, we didn't have a picture, any other pictures, so we used this one.
She came over here in 1924, she came over.
Now, would she have lived most of her life over here without being able to speak English?
Yes, and she lived most of the time with us, and or she lived with my mother's other sister, or she just moved around from sister to sister. She never had a home.
So how did your folks happen to meet?
Well, there used to have dances down on 16th Avenue, and they had a get-together. And everybody'd go down there, almost every Saturday night. And, sometimes they'd drink beer, and sometimes they wouldn't. But it wasn't really a beer-drinking thing. It was just a social thing. And they'd just all talk Czech and just have a good time and talk about their childhood or memories or how they came over and stuff. And they dance in the streets and just have a grand time, and that's how my dad and my mother met.
Yeah. Did they marry in the church?
Yes, they did. They married in St. Wenceslaus Church.
They were both Catholics.
Yes.
So what was your dad's first job after he got married?
When he first got married was a job working for the city, putting that wall around it. And then when that job was done in the fall, he didn't know what he was going to do because they were already married. And so he heard of this farmer out by Greencastle that needed a laborer, and so that he would give him a place to live, and he would give him food and a little money. And so they went with this farmer, and he gave him a little house to live in, and he gave him food, and they had plenty of food, and I don't know what he gave him for wages or anything, but I know he helped him out, and he worked for him a year. And then this farmer said, he said, I can't afford to keep you, but I'll get you started farming. And he found him a farm down in North Liberty, and that's where they farmed for a couple years, and he gave him a pig and gave him a cow, and different farmers helped out giving him different livestock and stuff. But the thing was, it was an old homestead place, and the pigs all got diseased and died, and he had more trouble, and he kept coming back to Cedar Rapids and applying for a cooper's job at the packing house.
You had mentioned Greencastle.
Yes.
What was that, a village or?
Yes, a little village, and it's actually gone now, probably. I don't think there's anything there. It's close to the town of Newport and North Liberty and Ely in that vicinity. And it was just a small village, that's all.
Who was the oldest, you or your sister?
My sister. She was 8 years older than I.
Now, would she have been born down by Greencastle?
She was born there. Yes, she was born there. See, because I was born in Cedar Rapids at the immigrant house.
You had mentioned the fact that shortly after she was born, your mother and her both contacted
No, she didn't contact. The thing is, shortly after she was born, she was about 2 years old, and they had a visiting nurse that went around in the country to all these poor families and immigrants that would check on the children, and somebody reported my folks, and so she came over to see my sister, and my sister couldn't walk. She was dragging her one leg all the time, and she wouldn't walk. And so this nurse says, well, by all means, we got to take her down to Iowa City. And that was the time when the university just started. It was in a house. The doctor started it in an old house, and he was taking care of all these kids that came from poor families and from immigrants and stuff, and he was helping them out, and that's how the university started. University of Iowa started. In fact, there's a picture down there that I'm sure she's on one of the first pictures that they took.
There is a large display down there, and I think in the Carver Pavilion.
Yes.
Of this house.
Yes, and that's where she was, and they took her down there, and they had discovered that her leg wasn't growing right, and her hip had been out of place for so long that it had gone, so much cartilage had grown in there, and they had to keep taking it out. So she was in the hospital until she was 16 years old, because every year they had to do something to her hip. And so she got all her schooling there and all her training and everything there. And then she came home when she was 16.
So your dad was a certified cooper.
Yes.
He had a degree or a diploma.
Yes, he did.
And intentions was he could hope someday he could find a job at the T.M. Sinclair Company.
Yes, that's right.
Would there probably at that time period there'd probably been a great demand for barrows.
Yes.
At the packing house.
There was, because the thing is that they built this house, this cooper shop, right by the railroad, which is a picture there. The cooper shop is still standing, and they built that purposely so they could make the barrels there, because they used to pack in their lard and pork chops and soup bones, and they used to pack everything in there. Everything was packed in there so it could be shipped out, and that was their only means of shipping it out in barrels.
This Cooper building
Yes.
that you were talking about that was down on the property
Yes.
At the plant, is
Yes.
that still there?
Yes, it is, and it's sitting right there by the railroad tracks, and it's right on the corner of the lot there. That'd be kind of nice if it was a museum for the packing house.
Did your dad ever mention what his pay was when he started working for the
No,
Sinclair
he never
Company?
did. He never did, but all he had is high praise for Mr. Sinclair, because Mr. Sinclair would let him sometimes take certain meat home, so they'd have meat for the family to feed, and if they had an excess of something like bacon or excess of something, or like a lot of soup bones. My dad used to bring a lot of soup bones home, and he could bring them home, and there would meat for the family. But he was so nice, he tried to hire immigrants because he felt he was giving them a chance in the United States to work and make something for themselves. It wasn't just Czech immigrants, it was any immigrant that came in, any nationality.
Like what other nationalities?
Well, there were a lot of, there were some Germans, but a lot of Russians, and there were Polish, and there were,
Irish.
A lot of Irish ones, yeah. Different English, all kinds of nationalities was there. And it was real interesting because none of them could speak English. So they did a lot of hand talking.
Wasn't there a fraternal organization, or I don't know what you'd call it, called
ZCBJ. It was Zapadní Jednota. And it started out as an insurance agency, and what they did is they taught these immigrants, especially the Czech ones, that they needed something. If one of their kids would die, how would they bury him? They wouldn't have money. But if they would invest in this insurance, they would have always means to bury somebody. So my dad thought it was a wonderful idea. So every month he had to save 10 cents per person in the family to pay 10 cents a month to pay for this insurance policy for everybody. And of course, it started out with $500. All you got was $500 if you died. But it was enough to get started, and it was at least a security. And of course, that also, not only it was an insurance agency, it was a get-together agency. They had clubs, and they had branches, and they'd have parties, and they'd have picnics, and they'd have, they sponsored all kinds of things. And then they built that ZCBJ Hall there that is on 3rd Avenue and 12th. And of course, when they had that, but they'd have dances, and we had plays up there, and all kinds of Czech entertainment that was actually sponsored by this insurance agency. It's now the Western Fraternal Association.
Yeah. There was a place out along the Cedar River. It was a park. Would that have been the same group as
CSA? No, there was another group then started up as a CSA, and they got the CPS hall that's right there across, kind of Kenny Corner, and they started up too. So a lot of them branch. There's always some don't get along. So the CCBJ was the oldest. That's the one that really went going. But then the CSA wanted to make competition, so a lot of them joined that, and some of them joined that, and some joined both of them, if they could afford it, see.
So when your dad finally got a job at TM Sinclair,
Yeah.
I assume he moved back from Greencastle?
Yes.
And where did they live at that time?
They lived in this immigrant house. And at that time, all these immigrant houses are right along the parking lot of the St. Wenceslaus Church, and across from St. Wenceslaus Church were all immigrant houses that had been built there. And they all had a chance to buy them. A lawyer bought them all out, and then he would charge you 50 cents a month for, and eventually you'd get your house paid for. So my dad had to have 50 cents every month, and he had to have that 10 cents per person every month, and then the rest would go for whatever incidentals came up.
Did it have any facilities like water, lights, plumbing?
Nothing. No plumbing, no water. We had our well outdoors that was just dug with a sand point, and then we caught rainwater for washing, and we had outside toilet, and that's all.
Did you have a cistern?
Yes, we had a cistern. That was rainwater.
Mm-hmm. How about was there any stores around, like drugstores or anything?
Well, there was that Benish drugstore that was next door that you could go get your medicine or if you needed medicine, but nobody bought much medicine because everybody used home remedies as much as they could, so they didn't buy much medicine.
This Benish drugstore
Yes.
you were talking about, like what street corner would that have been on?
That was right next to us on the street corner of, that would
12th
be
Avenue and-
12th Avenue and, what is that, 7th Street? No. What street is in front of St. Wenceslaus?
I don't know, but it was quite near St. Wenceslaus Church.
Well, it's in the same block.
Mm-hmm.
In the same block, yeah. And we were all right on the corner with it. Benish's was first, and then our house, and then there were about 3 houses, and then the church.
Were your folks religious type people? Church go?
Well, we went to church every Sunday, yes. Oh, yes.
Was St. Wenceslaus a very active parish at
Yes,
that time?
it was, because it spoke Czech. And it took in almost all the Czech people around there. And people used to walk from a long ways. Then when we moved out in the country, we used the horse and buggy to go to church. And of course, it got to the point where the horse was making a mess, and we weren't cleaning up the mess. And so the people around there were asking if maybe we could come with some other transportation because of the mess.
You were talking about the Benish drugstore. At
Yes.
a later date, that was changed hands, and it was called, you said, Beaches? Or
Oh, no. The Benish drugstore, the men used to go there and play cards every Saturday afternoon, see? And the woman stayed home with the kids and did the baking and stuff. And it kind of outgrew the Pinnacle gang that the men didn't work in the afternoon, so that's where they played pinochle and drank a little beer, which he would furnish a little beer for. But they found that if they went to Vishek's tavern, which was kitty-cornered across the tracks from Benish's drugstore, that they had more space and they could drink more beer there and they could even get a little whiskey. So then they start playing cards there. Well, then they got to be too big of a crowd, so they ended up in the ZCBJ Hall. And there, of course, they only had keg beer there.
Yeah. Was St. Wenceslaus, was that the patron saint of the Czech people?
What do you mean?
St. Wenceslaus, the patron saint. Did you have a special celebration on St. Wence Day?
Not what I know of.
Okay.
Not what I know of.
How about newspapers, telephones?
Oh yeah, a newspaper. We didn't have a telephone. We never got a telephone. But we didn't even have electric lights. We had a lamp. But the only newspaper that my parents and my dad had to have a newspaper because he was very interested in news and all that stuff and history, was the Rapitsky Listi. And they were on the right there on 3rd Avenue across from the CS Hall. There was a big, and that's where that...
3rd Street, not 3rd Avenue.
Yeah, that, on 3rd Street. They started there. And then he used to take, somebody came around and told him that he should take it was called the Hlasatel, and that was from Chicago, and it came directly from Chicago, and it came once a month, and it had a lot of stories in there, and it had a lot of news in there, a lot of national news, and a lot of news he was trying to keep in touch with. But it also had little, what would you say, little stories in there of experience, of people's experience. So every time that came, I knew that night that I would be sitting by the dining room table with a lamp, and he'd read one of those stories to me, because they were always so interesting.
Did your dad have any ducks or geese or chickens at this little place?
Yes, we had, see, they didn't have lawnmowers, so there was no way of mowing that grass, so you worked it up into garden, and everybody who had one of these houses had everything in garden. You didn't mow grass like you do now. And in the back, the packing house would let you have, Sinclair would let you have any used lumber that he didn't need. He'd always had a pile that was free, and anybody could haul whatever they want to. Well, my dad would walk to work, and when he came home, he was always dragging some boards home, and he finally made a little shanty, and we would have geese and ducks, and we'd have a couple of chickens, so we'd have some eggs, and raise little baby chickens for fryers for our own meat. Well, one year we had 3 geese in there and a couple of ducks, and they didn't want to butcher them right away because they wanted to wait until the holidays to butcher them. And so we had a new snowfall, just a tracking snow, and my dad went out to feed them early in the morning, and the geese were gone. But he could see the tracks from men that had come and stole the geese. So he called the sheriff, and the sheriff came out there, and they tracked the men's tracks, crossed the tracks, they went across the railroad tracks, and way over beyond to the house, right to the house with the back door. And then they told my dad they couldn't do nothing about it because there was no proof that they took the geese, because they asked the people if they had the geese. Naturally, they said no, that they didn't take the geese, and they didn't have them. So, but they didn't go in the house to look, but they just took their word for it, and so they were out 3 geese that winter.
Did your mother, did she work in her younger years?
Well, she went and worked in the canning factory that was down there by the Star
Wagon
Works. Yes, and they worked just for the summer, and the ladies would go down there, and they would fill up a bucket of, when the tomatoes came down the line to core and peel, they'd have to put the good tomatoes in the bucket, and when they got a bucket full, they got a dime for every bucket that they filled up. and they would work all summer. But the thing about it is that if they had kids, the man was a real, of course I was just a little kid, only about 3 years old, so naturally he looked awful big to me, and he looked real mean, and he would come around and he didn't want any kids around. And if you had kids, you took off your apron strings and you tied them with your apron strings to your chair, and they had to stay at your chair. He didn't want no kids running around or anywhere. So when my mother would take me down there, I'd be tied to the apron strings and I'd play under her chair. You had to take your own chair to sit on, and I'd play under her chair all the time. She was cleaning tomatoes.
Was your mother allowed to take any tomatoes home and to use?
Not that I know of. I don't think so. He was walking up and down all the time, just checking on everybody. He was a very stern guy, and I was afraid of him.
In the wintertime, what did you do as a little girl in the wintertime? Was there sledding or skating or?
Well, I can't remember when I was little in town what I did, but I know in the country, where we would go sledding, and then my dad always cut wood for our wood stoves, and sometimes I'd go with him, and it was always fun to tramp around in the woods while he got all dead lumber and stuff, because there was timber all around us.
Can you remember any of your Christmases when you was a little girl? Was there such a thing as Christmas presents?
No, there weren't any Christmas presents. We tried to have a little tree, and it'd be decorated with home things. Usually home-baked cookies would be hung on there. My mother'd bake cookies and then hang them on the tree, and there never were any presents, because my dad always says your presents are your fresh fruit. We never had fresh fruit during the whole year because we couldn't afford to buy them, except if we raised them ourselves, had our own apple trees or berries or something. So he'd always buy grapefruit and oranges and all the fruit that, different things that we wouldn't have all year round. He'd buy that, and that's what we'd have for our, we called it koleda in Czech, and that's what we had for our treat for our Christmas.
Would he buy nuts?
Yes, he bought nuts. He always bought nuts. We had to, hazelnuts are grown in Europe, and so are almonds, and we always had to have hazelnuts and almonds. And we had to have figs. Now, I don't know what association they had with figs, because figs came from the southern part of Europe, more close to Turkey and Arabia in there, but he always had to have figs, a package of figs.
At Christmas time, did your mother have a favorite dish that she would, or a tradition?
Oh, we always had goose and sauerkraut and dumplings. That was a necessity. And then, of course, we had collages, and we had a babovka and a hoska, and all those, braided breads and stuff.
You had mentioned carp was a...
Oh, yes. Christmas Eve, we always had carp. And that's all you ate was carp, because carp was supposed to be a food that would bring you good luck all year, and so that's what you ate for your Christmas Eve dinner.
Do you suppose there would have been fish markets, or your dad would have went down to the river and Cedar and caught some?
Yeah, he did. He used to go down to Cedar and catch. They used to catch fish, and then later on, the city fathers would even make holes in the ice down by the dam, and they would seine out fish, and you could come down there with your buckboard and a tub and get all the fish you want. And then my mother used to smoke them and can them, and we had fish all winter then that way.
I don't suppose your folks could afford to buy you candy or gum throughout the year.
No, I never got candy or gum or anything.
You never got gum?
Mm-mm.
You were telling the story about your first time you chewed gum.
Oh, the first time I chewed gum was when this little boy came over, and that was when we were in the immigrant house, and I was about 5 years old, and he came over with some gum, and he told me that you got to chew it, you mustn't swallow it, and so then we put it at the end of a stick, and those iron grates that were always in front of stores, so the heat would expand out of the store or something. I don't know what they were really for. And people would drop pennies down there, so he taught me to take a stick and put gum at the bottom of that stick and pull those pennies out.
Did you, was there such thing as gum readily available when you were real small?
No, there wasn't. But us kids, since I knew something a little bit about what that little boy told me, why we always looked for gum, but we never had any money, so we could never buy any. We were very poor. But us kids used to go and chew the sap that used to gather on the trunk of the cherry trees. It was yellow sap, and we used to take that and chew that. Or we would chew wax when our mothers would make jelly or jam and
when they were canning?
wax. No, when they were canning jams and jellies. Well, then we'd get a hunk of wax and chew that for gum. But that was the only gum I ever had.
How about toys and pets?
Yeah, I had a lot of pets. I had a goose that followed me around. I used to get a big tub and fill it with water and let it get real warm, and then in the summertime, and then that was my swimming hole, and I'd take the goose in there with me to swim. And I had chickens. I had a chicken called Betty. I remember her. She used to follow me all over. Oh yes, and the calves and the cows. Oh, and the horse. Everything was a pet.
How about dowels? Did you have a dowel to play with?
No, I didn't have one till I was really too old to even play with it. And then I got it now.
I admit we were talking about Christmas Eve. Did you folks go to midnight mass?
Yes, they always went to midnight mass as long as they could. But then when we didn't have any transportation, we quit the church.
How about did your dad make wine or beer?
Yes, he made wine. He made wine and he made beer, and it was a regular custom. If anybody came over, you gave them a little glass of wine. It wasn't beer you served them as much as you served them a glass of wine. But I don't ever recall anybody getting drunk or intoxicated or carrying on.
Yeah.
You know, they never did. And yet they drank quite a bit of wine.
What was his favorite to make wine out of? Rhubarb or
rhubarb and dandelion and choke cherry. Anything you can get a hold of. If we had a lot of strawberries and they looked like we couldn't can them all, why we made strawberry. He'd make strawberry wine. Anything you could get a hold of, you made wine out of it.
And your dad your folks still do not speak English.
Not very well.
Yeah.
No. My dad learned better. But to stop and think, he did all his measurement in Czech. And then he had to transfer that into the English measurement, which is, it isn't that easy. But he did learn a lot of that, and before he died. But they always rather swing over to Czech. So when they came here, they always talked Czech.
How did he learn, or did he have any assistance in learning them how to speak?
No, the only thing is they did get a book when they applied for citizenship papers, they got a dictionary that would translate the words. And then when I went to school, I didn't know how to speak English, so when the teacher taught me things and I learned something at school, I'd come home and then we just kept repeating it, and that way I learned it twice as well, and they learned it too, and that's how they learned to talk English. And it was the same with math. I went through my math books with him, and everything right from the beginning, from first grade on, and that's how he learned a lot of that. And then he'd look at my books and he'd just admire them so much, because
and so proud of you that you could speak English and learn English and
learn it and teach it to him. Yeah. But actually, I got good grades in school, except my English was bad. I had a lot of trouble with English.
Did you ever hear your folks mention, did your dad believe in banks? Did he put his money in a bank? Or?
Well, at first they did, but they didn't have any money, of course, at first. But then later on, the thing is that this organization, that was this insurance organization, they had decided that they would start kind of like a bank. It wasn't really a bank. It was kind of a place where you could put your money for security, and then you could borrow. If you wanted to buy a place or buy a home, they would come, and if you didn't have the down payment, they would help you get the down payment. If you didn't have the money to rebuild and wanted to rebuild, they would loan you the money. You had to pay them back, of course. And it was called the Bohemian Loan. And that's, if you recall, there was a Bohemian Loan in Cedar Rapids. And that's how that started. And they started in this Mr. I can't think of his name right now, but it started in his home, and then he got a little place on 3rd Street, and he had a little office there, and then he hired a couple guys, and it built up to a real big business.
Would this have been later called People's Bank on 3rd Avenue?
No, it always was Bohemian Loan.
Mm-hmm.
But then the guys that worked for Bohemian Loan, some of the men had branched into and started People's Bank, like that. Krejci.
Mm-hmm. Is that the building that they renovated and brought back to look like it was years ago? That bank building down
Which
on
one is
3rd
that?
Down on 3rd Street.
The one on 3rd. Well, Bohemian Loan finally moved to the place right there on 3rd Street. I think now, isn't that for home? Isn't that apartments or something? For the elderly or something. Mm-hmm. And then they had one little branch somewhere else. They had a little branch in Cedar Rapids.
Did your dad continue to live in this same part of
Immigrant
town?
house, you mean? Yeah. No, after they got those geese stolen, my mother kept pestering that we better get an acreage, or we get a place where we can raise more. And so they were looking around, and there was this little acreage on O Avenue. And it was 10 acres, and it just had 2-room shack on it. It was really a shack. And then they had a lean-to where they put the animals in to heat up the shack. And so they got that, and they borrowed from the Bohemian Loan because they could, and they borrowed from the Bohemian Loan to buy the place. And then eventually, after they paid off the place, well, then they built a little bungalow on it. It's still standing. The bungalow is standing, but the people had built around it and made it a mansion. But when we moved out there, O Avenue was just a clay road, just dirt clay, and it was a mess.
O Avenue and what?
Just straight O Avenue.
What street?
No street.
No street.
No street.
Just way out on O Avenue.
Way out on the end of O Avenue. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there were pastures all around us that we rented, and there were fields there. We even made thrashed oats and stuff, and and a lot of woods. We used to go out in the woods and pick blackberries and make jam and jellies out of that. And a lot of wilderness was there, but it just developed so much, so very much.
Yeah. Did it have water?
No, we had, my dad dug I don't know how deep, about 8-10 feet deep, and then put a sand point in it, and that was our water, our drinking water. It had a creek running through it, but the creek was fed by natural springs, but we never used that. We let the animals have it for water, but our water came from this little pump that he had. Mm-hmm. And then later on, when they built the house, there was a Czech man that started drilling wells for the Czech people, Mr. Melsha, and he used to go around. He was a wonderful guy, and boy, if you couldn't pay him today, you could pay him tomorrow. That was his policy. And he dug the well, and when he dug our other well, he hit rock, and he said if he went any deeper, it'd be an artesian well. So he didn't go any deeper.
What did your dad have for transportation? The horse and
walked.
Buggy, or? He
walked. He walked a couple times, and then he got himself a bicycle. And he rode a bicycle from O Avenue all the way down O Avenue, down Ellis Boulevard, and all the way to the back of the house to work. And he did that for years and years and years. He rode this bicycle. But then in the wintertime, many, many times he couldn't ride the bike because the snow was too deep or it was ice or something. So he'd walk. He'd walk it. And then, it wasn't until I was in high school, and this distant relative that I've been trying to locate, this distant relative had this pickup truck, and he wanted a new truck. And so he said, Frank, you got to have my old truck. And for so much money, of course. And Dad said, I can't drive it. I never drove a truck. I can only drive horses. And he said, oh, you can drive it. And he brought it out one Sunday, and he made my dad go behind the wheel, and they drove all the way down to the end of O Avenue to the river, turned around, and came back, and he said, oh, you can drive. And that's how he learned to drive.
Did he have did you raise your own produce on this
Yes.
acreage you lived
Yes.
on?
We raised all our own produce, and we had milk cows, and we had a horse, and we had pigs, and we had chickens and ducks and geese, and then of course one thing led to the other, and there were a lot of chick people. They still got along and went down 16th Avenue, met all the chick, and they'd always say, don't you have a goose out there, or don't you have a chicken out there, or don't you have a duck out there? Well, one thing led to the other, and they start raising a lot of ducks and geese, and one time I don't know, it was about 100 ducks and geese they had. Oh, they had so many. And then we would clean them the week before Thanksgiving, and he put them in these great big barrels of water, to soak up and get cleaned out, real good. And a lot of times he'd leave them overnight. He'd cover them, though, and so nothing get in there. And he'd cover them, and a lot of times when he got up in the morning, why, he had to chop the ice and chop the ducks and geese out of the ice because it would freeze, But all people used to buy from him, and then Duluth grocery store that was down on the corner of Ellis Boulevard and No Avenue. He was down there, Lumiere, and he used to come out and he used to buy a lot of poultry and fresh poultry and stuff, and ducks and geese.
Yeah. You're talking about produce currants.
Yeah, we
Did
had
you have
currants.
currants? What
Yes.
are currants?
Currants are little red, they're like little red berries. They're very small, and they're on a stem, a little green stem, and they grow in clusters up and down. And my folks had a big, long row of them, and he used to pick them and put them in boxes and sell them down at the market. I think they were about 5 cents a box. 5 cents, 3 cents a box. And the women would make them because they always thought they had to have Bismarck's with currant jelly. You always, when you bought Bismarck, you always had currant jelly in it. And so everybody had to make currant jelly. And then we used to raise gooseberries. And everybody made gooseberry pie and gooseberry jam. And they used to sell so cheap. And they are green little berries that grow on a cluster just bushes about so high. And you have to wait till they're ripe, and then you pick them, and they're sour.
Where did you start school?
I started school at Edgewood No. 1. It was a country school.
You had mentioned that you went for 1 year down to St. Wentz.
Yes, down in the basement. We had they had a schooling down there for all of us. We were anywhere from 4 to 5 years old.
Did they call it kindergarten then?
It was a school for
Kind
us
of a
young kids.
Preschool.
No, didn't call it preschool. I don't remember what they called it. I don't think they called it. I knew it was school. That's all I knew it was. And I was going to learn something.
So you just went there for a year?
Yeah, but then they didn't learn us English. It was all in Czech. See? And so when I got to the Edgewood No. 1 school here, in this country school over here, that Mrs. Herlichka down there, Mrs. Herlichka, she knew Czech. And so she took a lot of patience, and there were quite a few of us that were Czech immigrant children, and she'd take time with us, and she would teach us English. And every time they would recite or read or try to learn to read, we had to repeat it several times to ourselves and out loud. And that's how we learned English. I don't know how she did it, but I learned English.
Are you in this picture?
Yeah.
She is the fourth one in the back row from the
Way in the back on that
From the
right-hand
right.
side.
Okay. Fourth one from the right.
And the upper photo is a picture of the Edgewood No. 1 school.
Yeah, that's a school.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And
was at Edgewood in what?
It's on Edgewood Road and E Avenue, where the Baptist Church is now. The Edgewood Baptist Church is. And they wrecked that. It used to be on that kind of knoll where they park now. and it was full of trees. It was real woodsy around there, and Art Besdick's boy climbed one of the trees. He was in my grade, and he fell out of the tree, and he broke his arm. And the next day, Mr. Besdick came with this a chainsaw, and he sawed down all those big trees all around that schoolhouse. So we didn't have any shade.
So you probably walked to school from
Yes.
out on O
Avenue.
down-
Yeah, that was about maybe 2 miles.
You're-
And one thing, we couldn't walk down Edgewood Road because if we went to the end of O Avenue, you know, that was all woods and real unsettled. And everybody told us, oh, we shouldn't go there because that was just a lane. Edgewood Road was just a lane. And so we couldn't walk that. So we had to go cut through all those little streets down there and head over towards the school, because that was more where there at least be a every so often, where there were no houses on Edgewood Road.
Yeah. When you were young, did you ever recall gypsies?
Yes, there were some gypsies, but they didn't come around as much. They stayed, I think they were more out further in the countries, and they didn't go closer to towns and to settlements.
This acreage your dad lived on, did he grow enough produce that he probably thought of selling it to people
Yes,
downtown?
my mother started peddling. They called it peddling, and you took the spring wagon and the horse, and I was the one who had to get down from the spring wagon and run house to house asking, do you want some corn, beans, tomatoes, whatever we were selling. And then my mother used to make cottage cheese, and people used to just fight over that cottage cheese. It was made real firm, and she could slice it with a knife like this, and they would take a slice for a dime. And she always had paper that she'd wrap it in, plain paper. You didn't have saran wrap and all that stuff like you do nowadays. And she'd wrap it in plain paper. But they'd buy a slice for 10 cents. They'd have a dime to buy it, so they'd buy it. And then, of course, she sold cream, and she sold cream in pint jars, and so then they'd buy a pint of cream, and they'd have that to pour over their cottage cheese.
Did your dad butcher his own hogs, or?
Yeah, we butchered our own hogs, but we never sold any hog meat or any cow meat. But he used to do all his own butchering. He knew how to do it he learned it from the packing house, because, boy, when he was down in the packing house, and any free time he had, he went wandering and looking and learning, you know, in the different departments. And he just wandered around in the different departments and got to know most of them.
Did your folks ever make blood sausage, or
Yes.
what do you call it, Yitzenitzi?
Yes,
Did they ever?
we did. Yes, we did. We used to have our own casings, wash out our own casings with lye and clean them out good, you know. But then it got so you could go down to Stussek's meat market down on 16th Avenue and buy a package of casings. So then my mother'd take them and she'd wash them in salt water real good, and then they'd fill them up.
Then how did you stuff them?
We had a grinder, and we'd grind the meat, and if they were bread internitzes, we'd use bread, and if it was the blood ones, it would be blood and barley, you know. Yeah.
Do you remember, are there any other parts of the hog?
I still like them. I still buy them.
Was there any other parts of the hogs that was unique that people used to use back then? That
Yeah, they used the cheeks of the on the head of the hog, and that was a delicate piece of meat that those cheeks were. They were, you can still buy them, but not very much. You have to almost go down to Poland and get them.
they are called, that piece of meat is called, it's not ringing a bell with you either.
We call them cheeks.
Cheeks.
Yeah. Because that's the translation in Czech.
How about the ears?
The ear, oh yes, you always had to eat the
The
ears
feet?
and the snoot.
And the feet?
You clean the snoot and the ears, and the ears you'd stick it. You can still buy ears, you know, and you put them in the oven and bake them, and they're just like crisp, crunchy, you know, real crunchy and good. Oh, delicious. And then we used to pickle the snoot, and then the feet too. We'd take the feet and we'd pickle them, and you can still buy
Yes,
pickled
you can.
feet.
They're not healthy, but they sure are
No,
good.
they sure are good. In fact, I had a jar the other day. You don't see them very often.
What about Rocky Mountain oysters or pig testicles?
Yes, that was a delicacy. And what the men used to do is, like if they only had butchered one hog, they would keep it, and then the neighbor down the road or several others would get them, or when they also had them when they were trying to, they do that to the hogs so they don't breed.
Castrate them.
Castrate them, yeah. Well, then they get a whole mess of them. Well, then the men would get together. The women would cook them, but the men, well, usually the women didn't go to these parties. It was just mountain oysters and beer. But they used to have them down to Fairfax all the time. And I know that the men used to go down there all the time to the Fairfax, to the dinners, you know. And I think my son still got some in the freezer that he's going to have one of these days, a mountain oyster party.
When you had all of these pets, the ducks and the geese and the
Yeah.
chickens, you probably had names for them.
Yes, I did.
And then in the fall of the year, when they got the hatchet, didn't you feel kind of bad?
Well, it just depends. When I was young, I didn't want to butcher them, but when I got older, why, then I could see the money in them and I butchered them.
In the Czech area, there was a group, a Sokol group.
Yes, Sokol group, yes.
What was that group?
That was an athletic group, and they did all kinds of exercises, and they would even go to different towns, and they had they called them Sokol sleds. And they would get together, and this group from Cedar Rapids would join the group in Omaha and the one in Chicago, and they could all do the same athletic thing under one instructor, and they were very, very good. And it was a wonderful program. It kept everybody in fit because you did it from little until you were big. But my folks had no transportation for me to get down there. And the other thing, they didn't have the extra money to pay. You had to pay a fee for belonging, and then a fee every time you went to one of these athletic things.
Was that kind of like a healthy body, healthy mind,
Yes,
and
yes,
like
yes.
4-H?
Yes,
They
yes,
did
it
this
was.
over in the old country too? Is that
Yeah,
kind of where
oh
they brought-
yes, it started in the old
That's what I
country, and they still have it, and it's very prominent. Now, they don't do that so much now in Cedar Rapids. They still have, I do think they have maybe 1 or 2 classes down there. I don't know for sure, but I do help out there when they have their suppers, and I help make kolaches and dumplings.
When you were living out on this acreage now and growing up out there, did you still continue to go to St. Wenceslaw's Church?
No,
downtown?
we couldn't go because they had told us about the horse leaving its droppings, and we didn't have any transportation, so we had to quit the church. My folks felt real bad about quitting the church, and so we just quit the church, you know.
It was
And
too
so
far
then
to walk.
Yeah, and it was too far to walk. And so then when I went to Edgewood School here, there was a man that had quite a few children, and he decided his kids needed a little religion. And so he started up a church in a hog house. He cleaned out a big old hog house that he asked the farmer. It was just sitting there on the hill, there on the Rogers Road. And he cleaned it out with his wife, scrubbed it out and everything else. And then they cut trees and made stumps for us to sit on. And we sat on stumps. And he had, if we could bring a nickel or bring a couple pennies every Sunday, that would pay for the paperwork that he gave us, the little piece of paper telling maybe the story of Jesus or Mary or something. And he would actually talk and read out the Bible, and he taught us many, many songs like Jesus Loves Me and all those that I've never forgotten.
You remember what the man's name was?
Huh?
You remember the man's name?
Yeah, Mr. Hale. His name was Mr. Hale. And he had a son that was, I know, he was about my age, and that boy had the most beautiful voice you ever heard, and he would always lead us in song. And we had no piano, we had nothing, we just sang. The top of our voices.
You were talking about horse and buggies and horse and
Yeah.
wagons. What what did they do about the droppings downtown or wherever a crowd gathered? Would somebody come around and pick up the horse manure? Or?
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know. That's where a lot of things were stopped. In fact, like, I talk about the first apron dances where the women got together. They got tired of these men playing cards every Saturday night, and the women had to sit home with the kids, so they decided to have apron dances. And they had apron dances, well, they used to walk from all over Cedar Rapids down to the CSPS hall. First it started the CCBJ hall, and then they got kicked out because the men were playing pinochle there. So then they went into the CSPS hall. But they always had the dance that it would start at right after lunch and it'd be over with by 4 o'clock, so they'd be home in time to make supper for the men. See, and the men didn't even know they were gone. and they would. So then when my mother was out on the acreage, she'd take the horse and buggy in. And I had to go along, of course, because there were no babysitters, and everybody brought their kids. And us kids had to be real good, and we sat all along the outside of the wall, and we didn't dare to move. And then when the music stopped, which was all the music they had would be somebody playing a piano or a violin or accordion or a mouth organ. Or sometimes they didn't have any music, they just sang. But they danced. I'll tell you, they could dance. And so then we would dance in the hall, see. But then like my mother, she'd take the buggy and we'd go into town. Well, then all those people around the CSPS hall reported it to the city fathers. And so they gave us a notice that we had to quit bringing our horses down there. And we had to find other means of transportation. So then my mother said, well, I'm not walking down there. So that was the end of that.
You started at the Edgewood #1.
Yes.
And did you graduate from 8th grade from
Yes,
there?
yes, I did. And I went on to Roosevelt School, and I graduated from
Yeah.
Roosevelt.
A lot of your classmates that you went to school with, are you still familiar or friends of them?
Oh
today?
yes,
Yeah.
we get together every once a month. We try to get together. There's very few of us, but we get together and we have lunch at the Eagles. Yeah, Eagles down here on 33rd Avenue.
So by the time you got to 8th grade, you could probably speak English quite fluently.
Oh yes,
By that
oh
time,
yes,
yeah.
oh
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Good. How about your folks?
My folks were lots better too. My mother had a real difficult time. But see, she had gone to school and she had passed every grade except the 4th grade. And when she was in the 4th grade, she couldn't pass it, so she couldn't go to school no more.
Do you suppose it bothered your mother any? Was she kind of a reserved type person, maybe for this reason, or it didn't bother her?
No, it didn't bother her.
Because there's enough Czech people around her, friends
Yeah.
that she could talk to.
Right.
Roosevelt School. Did you go through 4 years of high school at
Yes,
Roosevelt?
yes, I graduated from Roosevelt
What year?
in 1940.
Yeah. Did you ever take advantage of the big hill there in sledding time in the
No,
winter
I had
time?
enough hills at home.
Yeah, I guess you would have. And did you walk to
Yes.
Roosevelt from out on O Avenue?
All Avenue,
Yeah.
all the way.
You must have been a healthy girl.
Yeah, I was. Never saw a doctor or a dentist. And we used to walk down to the skating rink. There was a skating rink there where the Fillmore School is, and they used to flood that. And we used to go down there, and you go down there about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you could skate till 9 o'clock. And we'd walk down there and skate, mind you, all night long till 9 o'clock, and then walk home.
That old
Any-
Fillmore or new Fillmore?
Huh?
See, Fillmore, there's an old Fillmore and a new
The
Fillmore.
old one. The old one, yeah. Yeah.
How about during your high school years? Did you have any odd jobs that you worked?
Yes, well, I did try to participate in a lot of sports and a lot of things at school. I belonged to several of the clubs at school, and I participated in plays. But I needed money for clothes, and so I did housework. And in the summertime, I picked berries, and I did housework. People used to have big farms and big acreages, and they'd have them full of strawberries and raspberries, and they'd hire us kids to pick them. We'd pick strawberries for a penny a quart, and we would pick raspberries. We would get 2 cents 2 cents a pint for raspberries. And then they take them down to that growers association downtown and sell them. And kids would do that. But nowadays you can't get anybody hired. You can't get kids to do that. And so that gave me money to buy material to make my clothes for school. And anything else I wanted for school. Well, then as I got older, when I got into 10th and 11th grade, then I could do housework because I was old enough, see? So then I would do housework all summer. In fact, I worked for Charles Deuster. He had a grocery store down there below where the telephone company is on 3rd Avenue. A big grocery store, one of the biggest. And
Is that the name of it, Deuster's?
Deuster's. Duster.
You had mentioned the fact that you were quite active in debate.
Yes. Yes, I was very active in debate and traveled quite a bit with the school on a debate team.
You competed against other schools.
Schools, yeah.
You remember any subjects you used to debate?
Well, the subject was, let's see, should United States, resolve that United States own and run the railroads? That was the thing, and I debated against it. I didn't think the United States should own the railroads. I thought it should be a private concern.
How about sports?
Sports? Well, I was active just in a few sports, but I couldn't be too active because I had to work most of the
You
time.
mentioned check plays.
Yes, I was in a lot of Czech plays, an awfully lot of them, and I enjoyed those. You spoke Czech, and you it was all in Czech. You did it all in Czech, and you had costumes. And when my grandmother first came over, she had never been to a play, never been to a movie, never been to anything, and she went with my folks to see one of my plays, and it just happened that. Can I tell the story?
Yeah.
And it happened. I was supposed to be in this love scene with this man, and we were meeting behind the church and having a kiss. And my father was against it in the play, and his father was against it. Well, here around the corner comes my father with a shotgun, and he shoots at us. See, well, he didn't really. The bullet was shot in the back of the stage, and my grandmother thought they actually shot me, and she jumped up in her seat and started screaming, yelling for help. She thought I was shot. That was the fun things of those plays. There were a lot of things that happened that, you don't need to have all work. It can be a lot of fun, too.
That's right.
You can make fun out of almost anything.
You had mentioned you were active in the drill team.
Yes.
What was this?
The drill team was a drill team from this new insurance agency. This is the whole group that started. He was our first president of this insurance agency that started where my dad paid a dime every month, ZCBJ, or what is called the Western Fraternal Association. It's way out there on First Avenue. They got a new building out there. And there was a group of us young gals here, and we made our dresses were white, and our capes were red and blue, and our hats were blue, and we'd go around, and every time that they had, when Marshalltown or Cloutier or Belle Plaine or some of these small towns had about 10 new members that joined the insurance agency, we'd initiate them. And then they'd have a big dance and a party. Well, we'd put on a drill, and then we'd have a speech talking about the honesty and security and things of the lodge, and that's what we did. And we used to enjoy that. We even went to Chicago once. We thought we were big shots.
You had been a very flashy-looking bunch with those uniforms.
Yes,
and
we
capes.
were. Yes, and we did all kinds of Mrs. Josephine Cuba from the Cuba Funeral Home was our leader, and she used to send places, in New York, to get marching formations, and that's what we would follow. And she would teach them to us, and then we did this marching formations, and we usually spelled out ZCBJ, and we'd spell out different things by formations, by marching.
Was there, during the war, did the young people participate in any war effort?
Oh,
to
yes.
help the war?
There were a lot of things. Now, all of us gals, we used to go up upstairs in the CCBJ hall, which was a big room up there, and we used to knit sweaters and the Red Cross and different groups, and we sometimes had our own yarn, and we get the patterns and we knit scarves and sweaters for the boys in the service, or blankets. We made blankets, and we were kind of busy doing all those things, and then I decided to join the service. So then I had to stop all this. I left it behind.
When you were in high school, were you allowed to date, or was there dating going on between?
Yes, there was, but it was more in groups. We were more in groups. There wasn't too much individual dating. It was more or less like when we went skating. There were 4, 6, 8 of us. We'd all go together. And
Safety
we'd all go
in
home.
safety in numbers.
Yeah, I guess.
Do you remember any of the old dance halls in this neighborhood?
Oh yes, we danced at the ZC, we danced at the CSPS, we danced at Linger Longer, that was over the hill. That on a nice summer day we could sit in the backyard on our farm and we could hear the music.
What street was that on?
Linger Longer? I don't know, it's off of Edge of
Zika?
Road. I don't know what street.
It's out by Zika.
Zika Avenue. It's
Zika.
past. You'd have to take Zika Avenue and go down, and then down to down where the dump is. Down there, what they call that?
Stumptown?
Stumptown. There was, what was it called? Hawthorne Dance Hall.
Hawthorne?
Yeah, dance hall, and it was all open. It was a complete open building with a big roof on it. That's all. When it rained, it would rain inside. But they had this. What fascinated me is they had this great big light in the center, and it had sparkles on it. And as the light went around, it sparkled all over on everybody, and that fascinated me. And then, of course, went down to Swisher. Swisher had a big pavilion where you went dancing, and then there was a dance hall out to Miller's Farm, and that farm was out the Otis Road, and it was called Miller's Farm, and all it was is like a starting of a barn, and it was the floor, and they never went up with the barn, and we danced on that.
There used to be a barn-like place off of Ellis, going out along the river. It was open in the summer times. It was a red barn. Do you recall that?
No, I don't recall.
Just
that.
up the road from Edgewood and Ellis, up along the river.
I can't recall
Okay.
that.
You had mentioned...
Of course, it's transportation that would get me to these places. And
yeah.
if you didn't have means of transportation, you always had to walk. Just like we walked to Linger Longer and dance and then walked home. You know, and that's quite a walk.
Let's take a break. Did you, about this time in high school, did you get involved with the Czech Heritage Singers? It was called?
No, when I was in high school, I was in the high school singers. I was with a quartet at school. And so we used to go around from the school and sing at nursing homes and different places. We used to sing. And then we sang on WMT a couple times, and that was it. But no, I didn't go into the Czech Heritage.
Till later.
Till later. This was a later thing anyway that propped up.
When did your folks pass away?
Oh boy, that's a good question to ask me. I forgot the dates already. I gave you the dates. Didn't you write that down?
I had your dad passed away in 1967.
Yeah.
Oh, I do have him.
Yeah.
How old was he?
Let's see, he was 70, I think it was 76.
Would he pass away of
Cancer of the prostate.
And your mother?
And my mother,
1982, I think.
yeah,
you
and
said.
she was 85. And she passed away with cancer of the colon. But
Laura,
they never went to doctors. They didn't have checkups like we do. We run with every little thing. And they never did.
Yeah. Did they die in a rest home? Or?
No, I took care of my dad until he died. And then my mother was living alone, and then I had to take care of her because she couldn't get around. And so I would leave her stay in her house as long as she could, and then I took care of her till she died then.
Was there longevity in your bloodline, your aunts or grandma or grandpa?
No, they all around 80, 85.
Lenora, this is going to be the end of this tape, and we'll continue your life on tape 2. Thank
Okay.
you very much.